my name is Ed Clendenin. We're at the Tulsa Air and Space Museum. It's September 3rd, 2009, and I'm with
Hal Heist. I was a navigator with the 376
and you were which squadron?
and the 514 Squadron.
And were you inducted or drafted into the military for the war?
I had intended to go into the cadet program and went on a 2-week hunting trip. I got back and they had closed this was in 1942, December 5th of 1942. So I ended up going to the draft board and get voluntarily inducted.
Voluntary inducted. And did you volunteer for the Army Air Corps right away?
Yes, it was. I had a little help from the commander of the VFW in the state of Ohio.
I see.
That got me headed to the Air Corps, the Army Air Corps at that time.
So did you then go to officer training?
I went through regular enlisted basic training and went to a trade school, a radio operator mechanic school in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
So you were starting out to be a radio operator?
And it was about 2 weeks before the graduation that they finally got my cadet stuff through. So
I see.
that's when I went into the cadet program.
And did you choose to be a navigator, or did they pick you to be a navigator, or?
Well, it was a situation when you got to classification where they decided that you take the tests and cycle and psychomotive tests and one thing another, and then they would come out and say, well, you're qualified for this and this and that, but you're mostly qualified for navigators. They needed navigators.
So it was pretty much, you were destined to be a navigator.
And they destined it for me. I was trying to be a pilot. You know, I was a tire kicker at the airport when I was a teenager. And
So they trained you to be a navigator. Now, did they pick the type of bomber you trained on, or was that
No.
later on?
That came later. You know, you went to navigation school, and I was sent to Ellington Field eventually in my cadet training, and that's where I went to the advanced navigation school. And at that point, they send you to a crew depot, like where you are put into crews and assigned.
That's where you met your pilot?
Well, it was down in Charleston, South Carolina.
And your pilot's name was?
Marvin Ehrenberg.
Marvin Ehrenberg. And did you then meet the co-pilot and the bombardier?
That's where the crew formed, was at Charleston, South Carolina, the air base there. And we started our, what they called the RPU, or crew training, where we flew missions, specified program of missions, and got acquainted with one another and working together. And
I see. So the enlistment also formed up at that time?
oh yeah,
Okay.
we had a full crew, and we flew B-24s, you know, and we flew gunnery missions and bombing missions, and the last mission was like 1,000-mile cross waterways,
I
and
see.
you know, we flew down to Cuba and Bahamas and back, and it was a pretty good trip.
So once they decided that you guys were qualified to fly as a crew, did you fly a plane over to Italy, or did you take a boat, or how did you get
Well,
over the theater?
they sent our crew up to Mitchell Field, and we set up there for 2 weeks. And every other day, we'd go through the supply chain, and we'd check out the equipment to fly an airplane over. And then the next day, they would say, well, the airplanes aren't going to come from Little Run, so you turn all that stuff in and check out the gear to go by boat. And the following day, we would go through the same routine in the reverse, we'd check in all the stuff we took, had
Uh-huh.
taken out of supply to go by boat, and checked out all the gear that we needed for flight.
I see.
And that went on for about 2 weeks, and they finally sent us down to Hampton Roads, Virginia, and put us on what was it, not a Victory ship, what was the other one? Well, it was like a
Anyway,
Victory ship.
So you went over by boat?
Yeah,
Okay. And how long did it take you to cross the ocean?
it was like 27 days.
27 days.
We took, there was, I had the privilege of being the navigator for the ship.
For the ship? Oh, okay.
The second mate was his first trip as a second mate, and the second mate is normally the navigator on the ship. There were 82 ships in the convoy, and our speed was relegated by the slowest ship. It was something like 8 knots. And so they asked me to navigate the ship. I had access to the bridge, and I would change the radio channel so that the speakers in the quarters where all of our B-24 crews were could have music or whatever was available. And then I also tracked the convoy's progress, and I took a noontime fix, and that was sent by flag. We had radio silence, and it was sent by flag to the Commodore ship, and they plotted all those to average them out to see where we were.
So you managed not to get the convoy lost?
Went right through the Straits of Gibraltar.
And where did eventually did the boat dock? I assume it was in Italy?
In Oran.
Oh, Iran, okay.
And we had a load of goods that were headed for to support the invasion of southern France.
Okay.
And they took us off of that ship and put us on a French day cruiser that had been scuttled by the Vichy.
Yeah.
And they raised it up off the bottom of the ocean, the Mediterranean, and pumped it out. And this was the first trip that they had made with it. And it originally was a day cruiser that went from Naples to Marseille, I think to Gibraltar, and then down to Oran, and then we went back up to Naples. It was about a 5-day leg or cruise. And they had, I think there were about 350 of us air crew, and then they put a company of black, Afro-Americans, I should say.
On the boat with you?
Young, they had segregation in those days. And
Right.
this was a young light tank group,
Uh-huh.
and they were going over to Italy, and they put them in on our ship, so we shared. And when I got on that ship, I was still appointed as the mess officer, and I didn't navigate it, but I was relegated as a mess officer.
I see.
So I had access to the galley, and I got a bunch of volunteers that came down there, most of them from the black guys come down there. And we managed to get along pretty well.
Good.
We had a great time.
So you left Iran, and then where did you port
We
in?
went up to Naples.
To Naples.
From Iran. And
Did
it
some
was,
work there?
The ship was, had a list of about 5 degrees. It just, you didn't know if it was gonna make it. And it took probably 2 days or more to get up to Naples
Across
from
the
Iran, across the Mediterranean.
So when did you finally then arrive at the 376?
It was probably a couple of weeks later, they sent us to our assignments to
So would that be the fall?
376 was over at San Pancrazio.
So it'd be what, the fall of 44?
It was in the fall of 44, October, November.
Okay.
And we went across the Italian boot, or whatever you would call it, over to San Pancrazio. And it was like 160 miles, if it was that far across there, and on these 40 and 8 type train
Trucks.
boxcars.
So you're gonna train?
We're on boxcars.
Oh, boxcar,
Yeah, it wasn't luxury train, it was boxcar.
Wasn't coach car, it was a
They'd go about 2 miles forward, and then they'd back up a mile, and then they'd go another couple of miles. That I don't know. It took us something like 24 hours to go the 168 miles.
Wow. And so when was your first mission, and where was it to?
My first mission was on, I think on the 6th of December, it was to, was it Zimbabwe or?
That was in Hungary?
Yes. And it was up in the Lake Balaton area of Hungary. And we took off. Of course, you know, for the first mission or first couple of missions, where they would put us in with an experienced crew or fill in spaces on an experienced pilot's crew. And it was enough to get us oriented so we knew what to expect and handle our business on our own crew. And the only information that we had for navigation was the metro data, which was given, you know, the forecast for winds and at altitudes and stuff. And we took off, and as we're rallying, we ended up with a complete undercast and a complete overcast. So that we were up at climbing on course, going up through Yugoslavia and on up through to Hungary, to that area. And we got up to about 24,000 feet, and we're en route. And the box that we're flying in the formation, the squadron formation, was, I think the pilot in the lead ship, maybe he had taken it out of autopilot and was flying manually and got vertigo. And we were flying in the number 3 position in a formation. To familiarize ourselves, the lead ship is here. The number 3 is down here low and behind. The number 2 position is high and to the right. And the formation was flying in this attitude.
Because of the vertigo of the lead
Because
pilot.
of the vertigo that the pilot hit. The number 2 plane had a wing stall and went right in front of us, you know, right down through us.
Yes.
And our pilot dumped the plane and put this B-24 into the tightest spiral. They said you couldn't get it into a spin, but that was about as near a spin as it was possible. And I was immediately slammed to the floor of the office in the nose of the plane.
Yes.
The centrifugal force held me there. I couldn't move. I was frozen to the floor. All I could do was look up at my gauges and watch the altimeter going like this and the airspeed indicator going way up past red line to, I don't know, 300 and some miles an hour or something. And I said, well, this is it. And somehow or another, that crazy guy pulled that airplane up.
Now, was this Aaron Burke?
And this was a guy by the name of Ed Howeely.
Oh, okay.
He was the pilot on on that plane on my first mission. And he pulled the plane out of that tight spiral. And it was, you want to bear in mind that it was fully loaded with gas and with bombs. We weren't that far up. We were up in somewhere up in Yugoslavia. The only information I had was dead reckoning that I had done from the metro data.
Right.
There was no other, I hadn't seen the ground since we left. So we had managed to pull that thing out at, it was about 11,000, between 11 and 12,000 feet. And we got up on top a little bit, and got to get my bearings and stuff, and I'm trying to determine where we were. And I've got us located as far as the dead reckoning, but I have no assurance whatsoever that that's our accurate position.
Right.
At the same time, about 4 miles or so off in the distance, I see a lone B-24 that's getting shot at with a, you know, pretty good bunch of flak coming up, tracking. I looked on my map, and the only place in the area that had that kind of gun emplacements on it was Maribor, Yugoslavia. So I assumed that might be Maribor, and it checked out with my dead reckoning. And we got out and hooked onto another box somehow. It isn't really clear in my memory how we managed, but we never did go to the target. We eventually had to go back.
So you never caught up with the 370 formation?
We didn't get back in our own formation.
But you went to another target with another
And
group?
I checked before, I checked my log.
Yeah.
And there isn't too much notification in there about this thing,
Huh.
Somehow or another, it didn't seem that significant or something, but then when I start checking the position that I had the aircraft in, there was a little over 9,000 feet of mountains. So we pulled out with, 2,500 feet or something before the hard objects would have hit us.
Now, whatever happened to the plane that originally caused you to spiral?
The number 2 plane, it was an interesting little bit of that too. The bombardier on that plane was the Lieutenant Beck. And the night before, we were new in the area, and we had, our crew, some of us had gone over to Lecce, a town in the area of Santa Croce. And we're looking things over, a little adventuresome stuff. And I ended up with running into this Lieutenant Beck. And the rest of the guys went back, and Beck and I did some things, had a couple of drinks together, and he was showing me, and he was an old vet. He only had a couple of missions to go. So we get back to the squadron area, and lo and behold, we're both on the next day's mission. He was in the number 2 plane, and I was in the number 3 plane. And that was the end of,
So the plane went down?
Yeah.
Okay.
That number 2 plane went down, and it was never, I don't know to this day how many of them got out, if any of them got out.
Or why the plane fell off, or just?
Well, obviously it was, it just had a wing stall, we're flying formation on that.
Back to the lead pilot flying up at an angle.
Well, I assume that he had vertigo. I'm not sure about that. I'm not,
I understand.
yeah.
Now, you were saying earlier, the most memorable mission you were on. So why don't you tell us about that?
Well, that was it.
That particular mission?
We had several things that happened. We got shot up looking very bad and had to land and make emergency landings in different places, in Yugoslavia and up in the Fođ area. And we had to crank down gear and stuff, and got shot up pretty bad. But that was more or less the routine of the combat.
But the first mission you just got to
But
describe.
that one was really an eye-opener.
Now, the one you just described, were you the only one on your crew that was on that plane?
There were two others, I think Bill Walters, my engineer, was on the plane. And, I'm not sure if there was, I think that he was, the pilot, the engineer, and the navigator were the ones that flew a mission or two before we took off on our own.
So you must have had an image of what combat was gonna be like before you ever did it. So after you got back from this first mission, did you look at each other and say, this is worse than we possibly thought?
No, not really. It's like a game. You know, you don't realize how serious it is.
It's okay, take your
Until
time.
you get some holes in your maps or your stuff you're working with, when they're shooting at you, well then, hey, this is real serious.
Yes, I can imagine.
At the time, it's just another day at the office.
Mhm.
But it's when you really get into it that you know that you're in trouble. But we managed to get through, and we only had a couple of casualties in our crew.
You had a couple of casualties in your crew?
We had our tail gunner got hit with a piece of flak on one of our last missions with the 376, and we sent him to a field hospital, and then they shipped us out.
Mm-hmm.
And the poor guy felt like he was abandoned. We had been over to the hospital to visit him and went to see him, and never went back because they shipped us out to up north.
I see.
And this guy never has attended a 376 reunion.
Because he felt abandoned by you.
I'm sure that's what it was. And I still correspond with him.
Huh. Now, so the rest of the crew basically remained intact?
Yeah, we stayed in contact with each other pretty much. There was one, the ball gunner was a young fellow from Pennsylvania, and he died maybe 2 or 3 years after we got back from combat. He had leukemia,
Oh, okay.
and he was a real nice young fellow. He was probably in his early 20s when he died. And I was back in Toledo going to school at that time.
Now, the 376 flew its last mission on April 15th of 45. You said you went to another group,
Yeah, I can't even tell you the number of it.
but you flew more missions with another. Did you fly any missions with that group?
I did. I flew a couple of missions with that group, and they were not too good. You know, the 376 had esprit de corps.
And this other group did not?
No, we were completely professionals,
Uh-huh.
and they had such a history behind them that I think it carried on through all of the crews that came up. I was behind the guys that really had the tough times.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was flying in 1944 and 45. Toward the end of the war, I had 47 missions. But the guys that went to the low level in Ploesti and those guys were the ones that really had it tough.
Mm-hmm. Now, so after VE Day, what did you do?
I was in Rome on VE Day.
Okay. On R&R?
Yeah, they had sent us to Rome on a 5-day rest and recuperation type thing, and I was there when the Germans surrendered.
And when did you come? Did the crew fly home, or did you take a boat home, or what?
We went back to the depot at Joya and picked up a brand new airplane. It had 55 hours on
Uh-huh.
it, and flew it back to Bradley Field, Connecticut. We went from Joya down to Marrakesh and to the Azores, and to Gander, and down to Bradley Field, Connecticut.
And then what did you?
From there, we went to our homes and, went different directions.
Now, I remember my father, when he got back after the war, they basically, I don't know if he opt out, but he chose not to stay in it. Did you also stay?
Well,
Did you
I
stay
tried, I wanted to stay and make a career of it, but I couldn't find anyone or anything that gave me any indication whatsoever what the requirements would be to retain my commission and my flying status. And I decided pretty much on my own that the least I'd have to have a degree, which I didn't have. Now, I had an opportunity to go to college. I was just out of high school. I graduated from high school in 1942 and went into the
So you were what, 18 when you enlisted?
19.
19.
Yeah, I guess. I was 18, I guess, yeah. 42, I was 18, September 42. So in January is when I went in the service, and it was July of 43 before I got into the cadets.
Right.
I'd gone to a trade school, and I got into the cadet program, and it was first July when I got my commission and my flight wings.
So now you're back in the States, the crew's pulling the plane back, and you decided you're going to have to go to college?
Yeah, I stayed around. I was at Ellington Field, and during the time that I was there as a cadet, I had made several contacts or acquaintances, and so one of the acquaintances I had was the sanitary engineering officer, Captain Hoover was his name. And when we renewed our acquaintanceship, he said, "Oh, you don't want to be sitting there like that." And so he goes to the CO and gets orders cut for me to work under him.
Yeah.
So I had a bunch of mosquito traps around that I sort mosquitoes and stuff, that inspected all the mess halls,
Yeah.
the water,
Yeah.
the water supply, I checked the water supply to see that it was pure, that it had the right chlorine content and everything. And a bunch of menial little things. At least I was doing something. And when it became obvious that it was the time to get out and go back and go to school, then I opted to do that. So I stayed in for maybe 2 months or 3 months.
So you were discharged in what, November?
It
Fall
was,
of 45?
It was November of 45, last of November that I got home, and I started in February of 46 at the
So you went-
University of Toledo.
Went to school in the GI Bill?
Yes, it did.
And what did you study?
Well, my degree was Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering.
And did you have a profession in chemical engineering?
Actually, I never quite got to the round of taking the state exam, where, the professor that we had advised us not to take it right away, to work a little bit. And so I ended up working as a project engineer, and the engineering chief, anything that he could think of was, well, that's a chemical.
Okay, I see. And what company was that
So
for?
I worked for the Ordnance Corps.
Ordnance.
For 9 years, I worked for the Ordnance Corps at the old, what they call the old Erie Proving Grounds along Lake Erie. And at that time, I graduated in June of 1950, at the same time that we decided that Korea was an enemy.
I see.
And I had fully intended to voluntarily try to get back in the Air Force or the Air Corps at that time. But one of the things that I learned as an enlisted man was that you don't volunteer for anything, especially when it has some dire circumstances involved. And eventually, I stayed with the reserves and I retired from the reserve.
So they didn't call you up for Korea?
I never got called back. Several of my fraternity brothers did. I lost a couple of them, very dear friends from the Korean, from recall.
But you stayed in the reserve?
I did stay in the reserves and eventually went down to Wright-Patterson with the R&D and the logistics command.
So did you have, was the rest of your career at Wright-Patterson?
No, I went down there on tours, 2-week tours during the summers for those 9 years that I worked for the Ordnance Corps. And about that time, I got recruited by the Atlas program, the General Dynamics.
Oh, the missile program.
And I went to San Diego in 1959 on the Atlas program, and I was with General Dynamics for about 10 years. About 6 of it was with the Atlas program, and when it phased out, I had done enough work that they wanted me in the aircraft part of it
Okay.
at Lindbergh Field. And I spent 4 years with designing some of the airplanes,
Wow.
the C-5A or C-5 and the DC-10, and did some specialized work for that was classified with the F-106 that they were adapting for use in Vietnam. And then from there I continued work in different engineering fields in San Diego, in the San Diego area.
So was your career primarily then in the aviation industry, if I use that broad term?
It was for those 10 years, and the last 5 years of my career before I retired, I worked for a company in San Diego that was called Rohr Aircraft, R-O-H-R, which was bought by Goodrich Corporation in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
And I spent 5 years with Rohr, and they are the people that package power systems for the aircraft industry, the commercial aircraft,
The auxiliary power unit?
No, the engines.
Oh, the
And the
engines.
cells.
I
and
see.
the thrust reversers.
The main power
Yeah,
plants,
the
yeah.
thrust reversers. And they had several other things. I worked another 5 years with Cubic Corporation and worked in perfecting the automatic fare systems, fare collection systems, and the subway systems for Hong Kong,
Oh,
Washington, the WMATA system, the BART system in San Francisco, and Atlanta, and it was, I had a very.
sounds like you did, yes.
Well, I'm just glad that everything worked out.
Well, we're getting close to the end here. Is there any question I didn't ask or any topic you'd like to mention or
I
talk
think
about?
that we've covered quite a bit of it.
Okay.
There were a lot. It would be impossible to cover everything and every experience of him, but, we're thankful to be here.
How long have you been belong to the Veterans Association?
Well, my engineer, Bill Walters, attended a few of these reunions, and he was attending one that is down in San Antonio or something, and it had to be in the early 80s.
Uh-huh.
And he talked with a fellow from San Diego that was in my reserve unit. that we knew each other from reserves, and Herb was a member of the 376.
Okay,
Herb Contact was his
I
name,
remember the name.
and they got to talking, and Herb called me up and said, well, I met Bill Walters at the thing, and so the next meeting, or the next reunion was held in Las Vegas. And we had, see, me, 2, 3, 4, I think we had either 5 or 6 members of our crew
Wow.
to the Las Vegas.
So you must have, so you maintain contact with your fellow crew members?
But mostly,
Mostly.
I lost contact with my pilot for a little time. The last time I talked to him was in 1959 when we were going out to California. He was with Bendix or someone in South Bend area, and I talked to, yeah. And I talked to him when we went through there.
I see.
And then we finally contacted his mother and sister. We had corresponded, at least exchanging Christmas cards and things with his mother, and because they had taken interest in my wife and I when we were up there in New York area when we went up to Mitchell Field. So we had continued our contact, and that's the way we found out where Marvin was. And then after we reestablished contact, by that time he had come out to California, and he was living up in the Riverside area.
I see. So you've been coming to the association since the mid-80s?
I would say, yes. We had one very unusual situation. When we lived back in Ohio, we lived in a little community, or a small town.
Yeah.
Oak Harbor was the name of it. We lived on a farm about 5 miles out of town. It was near work. And of course, I'd been receiving notices while I was in college, and up to that time from the guys that formed the 376 Veterans Group.
Because they had started at, right, 46 or 47.
They were, one of them was from Cincinnati, and
Right.
Preble.
Jack Preble.
Preble.
He was the publicity officer.
Yeah.
With the group.
Yeah, well, it was before my time.
And then they disbanded for a while because they all had families and.
Well, they tried to get something going, and I kept getting notices and things, but of course, when you're on the GI Bill, I didn't have any,
Money is not
they didn't give you travel money.
Yeah. Room and board is.
So, anyway, I never attended anything like that, and anyway, we're at, this is along about maybe 1957 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And the weekly fish rag that was from up around Oak Harbor there,
Yeah.
it came out, and I get the thing, I'm looking at it, here's an article that says that the 376 Bomb Group is having a reunion in Sandusky, Ohio,
Yes.
which was maybe 20 miles or 25 miles across the bay.
Yeah.
So the wife and I decided, well, all right, Saturday night, we'll go over there and join in and see what's going on. Well, we get over there, and it was a rather disappointing thing. I get over there, and there was probably, maybe their total party at this reunion was maybe 30 people or something like that, 25, but a bunch of guys and gals there, and they'd been drinking all day. And south to the gills, and didn't know anyone, didn't recognize a name. There was nothing that meant anything.
So you went to that one, that was it.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about it until, after
the
we
mid-eighties.
moved to the West Coast. And like I had mentioned, we finally got started, and I haven't missed too many of them in that period since then.
Well, we're about out of time, so I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be interviewed, and I hope it wasn't too painful.
Well, it wasn't. I thank you.
And we appreciate your service, and best of luck to you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Be able to meet on their patio, and all the tripods and all were set up there kind of in a bunch. And my rig here, shown with a friend from Dallas who came down to witness the eclipse. That was in '98. The very next year was Turkey. Actually, the eclipse started, the path started over in southwestern England, came over Europe, and right over Munich, big city of Munich, Bulgaria, Black Sea, Turkey, and then on out into Iraq and Iran. You can see how close we probably were there to Syria, 120 miles. We were in the upper left corner there, a little place called Elizig. And this, along the path, was the highest and driest and most unpleasant place along the whole path, which was good. You must go there to increase your chances of seeing it, and we saw a great one. We were on a lake in the Lake Hazar. We were in the headwaters of the Euphrates River. And Euphrates is the river that goes down through Syria and Iraq, and is on the west side of Baghdad. But the headwaters, we were up there 4,500 feet. And the lake, I'll show you a picture of the lake here in a minute. There's a little town down the stream from us right there on the center line. You may be able to see it right in the center of the picture, and it's called Batman, B-A-T-M-A-N. And I thought it's kind of an unusual name for a Turkish name, but I always wondered where he lived anyhow. Turkey is a very nice place, and especially Istanbul, very beautiful. And here you can see out my hotel window a waterway over there to the right, and then it extends to the left. That's the Bosporus, and that's the waterway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. And Europe is on the front side here, and Asia is in the back. So Bosporus is the defining line between the two continents. The city of Istanbul also has many beautiful buildings. Actually, along the Bosporus, there are a lot of castles of the Ottoman sultans that built these palatial things, and you can go through them, and it's beautiful. They have a lot of beautiful mosques there in Istanbul. You can go through most of them. You take your shoes off. This is a blue mosque, the only one in the world with 6 minarets. The rest of them have 4 or less. And this is a beautiful structure here called Hagia Sophia. The original building was built in the 4th century by Constantine II. It was rebuilt by Justinian in the 7th century as a Christian church. And it was Christian all through the Byzantine, or however you pronounce that, empire, until the Muslims, Turks, took it over in the 1400s and converted it to a mosque. In 1935, Ataturk converted it to a museum, and presently it's a museum of both Christian and Muslim decorations, and it's a gorgeous sight. I'm here by myself. I'm in the upper right-hand corner, the third from the back row there. Because Barb didn't go. Earlier in the year, we had gone to the Holy Land on a church trip. And we had been to Turkey, and she had enough turkey. And so she stayed home. She was full of turkeys and stuff. So I went by myself. The eclipse site, as I mentioned a while ago, was on the shore of a lake. It's a very nice beach place. We could really sink our tripods in deep and get a good footing. And that was in 1999. 2 years later, we went to Africa, to the country of Zambia. And yet that's kind of colored there in the middle. And you can see the eclipse path arching across the continent there. And again, you can kind of see the rarity of people seeing an eclipse. I've seen a figure of less than 1% of the world has seen a total eclipse. But not much there, 80 miles wide and strip, and people don't know it's coming and everything else. So you can see why a lot of people have not seen it, how rare it is. Back to Zambia. Is old northern Rhodesia, British colony, and south of it is Zimbabwe, and the old southern Rhodesia. They're separated by the Zambezi River. when we landed at Cape Town, we went up to Victoria Falls on the Zambezi there and kind of relaxed and decompressed, I might say, and acclimated in the jet lag, whatever. And went on the Zambezi River trip and saw the Victoria Falls. The front edge of the falls there on this side is a path, and we walked that path, and we got soaked with mist. That mist is really rain. It's a 360-foot high fall, mile long. Zambia is in the background, Zimbabwe is in the foreground. So I couldn't get a good picture because my camera was, it was soaked, and so I went back up in a balloon and took a picture from the balloon, so I had a picture of that great falls. We went from there to a photographic safari, where we spent 3 days in a 3-tiered Jeep driving all over, and we saw every imaginable African wild animal that you could possibly see. And this was a big game preserve, so they were, halfway tame. We drove right up to elephants. It's not a little skittish, but we survived. Our group was broken up because of the size of the hutments here in the safari, and there was only a few here in our little hutment. The gentleman seated there in blue in the foreground, it was our cook, and he had 2 or 3 helpers. We ate all of our meals outside. The wall in the background separated us from the water hole where the water buffalo went. And I'm in the back with the white hat, and Barb's right in front of me with the blue vest. Our hutment was 10 feet off the ground on stilts. Very nice. It was electrically heated and hot water. We had a great time there. It was up high to keep the midnight visitors away. We saw a lot of wild animals, as I mentioned, and I won't show you all of them because you've seen them all, but our eclipse site was on a farm up northwest of the capital city of Lusaka. The Zambia capital, Lusaka, Frangilla Farms is where we went, and all lined up here in our, as a courtesy, we never get in front of the other guy. We don't kick his tripod or anything like that. He has his own little territory, and we respect that. And we saw a real great eclipse. This is my rig as we enjoyed this eclipse. I also took the individual photographs that I took on this particular eclipse. I've done this on 4 of them, arranged them in this order, and made a little frame for them. And what it is individual photographs. This is not a multiple exposure like we've seen before. Individual photographs, you scan them with a computer, you arrange them where you want, then put all the pertinent information about that particular eclipse and all your camera and film and settings over here for posterity. 201, in next year in 02, we went to Australia. Actually, the eclipse path came right over the general area that we were just at in Africa. And half of our group, our Barbersville group, went to Africa, back to there. We hadn't been to Australia, so we had to go. The northwest southeast line there on the right is the terminus of the eclipse. In other words, the sun sets right there. And so you have to get back to the left on that path, and that's where we were. We flew into Melbourne, which is lower right, and Adelaide, upper left, a little bit up from it on the left. And these were cities you wouldn't think, you thought you might be in Tulsa. Everything is modern and casual and very upbeat and so forth. We had a joyful time. Right above Adelaide was the vineyards that rival Napa, and it was a great tour of that. But then we headed up from Adelaide 300 miles northwest to get on the path. Now, remember, you got to get on the path. And a little blown up view of that path in black with the South Indian Ocean there on the left, lower left. You can see the path and the red highway up towards the upper center that branches off to the west and northwest is where we were going to be. Where the highway crossed the center line, we were going to set up camp. And we did that with our GPSs and drove a stake in the ground and went to Glendombo, a little city next to it, and stayed in Glendombo. Glendombo was a truck stop with well, it was a motel and a restaurant, very small. And we had very good food and really enjoyed it. And also was impressed with the city, with the people there of Glendombo, who were very proud of their diversity of their population. And so they proclaimed all that, all the different classes they had there. And we were in the outback, and I'll show another picture or two. Glendombo was very pleasant. As we toured around, we saw this lady that didn't have his glasses on. You can see him squinting there, and we had to fix him up. Here's our group from, this was the half a group. The other half's in Africa, remember? And our Bartlesville hosts there kneeling on the ground in blue. Chuck and Charlie, and our bus driver, Barb, was in the light blue between the bus driver and Chuck. And I'm on the upper left, second from the right guy. Upper right, second from the end guy. So we went to the eclipse site the next morning and just kind of piddled around because we had all day. This thing was going to take place near sunset. And here's my rig, and you can see from the attitude of the scope that it looks horizontal as though I was looking at the horizon. But you can also see shadows on my face, so the sun was still up in partial phase, no doubt. And Barb was rattling off the camera settings for me. And you can see the outback. We had red dust there as ground cover. And I say dust because it got all over everything, into everything, and we were shaking red dust out for weeks after we got home from everything that we took with us. Okay, the next one, I'm ready for this one anyhow. Go to Egypt. We went to the little city of Saloum. Our regular eclipse group went to Libya, and we did not want to go. We're not on good speaking terms with Gaddafi, so we stayed and went to Egypt. And with another group, and it was very nice, and we enjoyed ourselves. The Tourist Bureau of Egypt is very guarded towards tourists. We had armed guards on the bus, but they also like tourists to come back, and so they make your stay comfortable as they can. Where we were was, like I said, 3 miles from the border and 2 miles from the sea in the upper right corner there. And we were on a military reservation, an army base, if you will, right there on the frontier with the country of Libya. And the Tourist Bureau had convinced the military, maybe with a little persuasion, to accommodate the tourists. And there were 13,000 people there on that little triangular-shaped piece of land on that army base watching the eclipse. You can see here some of the setup that the Tourist Bureau has made for visitors. You can see one of 3 helicopters that landed while we were there, and we didn't, military base, didn't think much about it. We also saw some black limousines and SUVs roaring by the highway to the left here. Found out later it was the president of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, who came up there to see this great event with all the rest of us. Here's our eclipse lineup here as we lined up and saw again a spectacular view of the eclipse of the sun. Here's one of my pictures that I took. You can see that it is very similar to the one I showed you that Fred Espenak took, in that it has that little flare. It's not a flare, it's a prominence, but it's a flaming light piece that goes off. And anyhow, this is that diamond ring. And the picture of the totality you saw earlier, and this is Egypt, and it has the shape of Egypt. We took a little tour of Egypt and saw several things. I'll go through them rather hurriedly here. The big city of Cairo, 18 million people, and the Nile River slicing right through it. Southwest of Cairo, on the Giza Plateau, are the very large pyramids, and we went there, and we went to El Alamein on our way to the eclipse site earlier, and that's the location of the battle between Montgomery, the British general, and Rommel in November of 1942. Turned the tide of our war with Germany. This is a memorial cemetery. 7,000 British soldiers are buried here. We then went to on a trip on the Nile. We've never done that, of course, and we wanted to do it. We went up the Nile, that's south. In this little Nile Plaza, there are probably several hundred of these on the Nile. It's a very popular place for people to go. And when we went, we could see why, because it was just gorgeous. All along the Nile, as we went up the Nile, you could see on the other side areas of greenery that they grew everything agriculturally here as you can possibly imagine. We had gone to the city of Luxor from Cairo. You get on the boat, and Luxor is across the river from the Valley of the Kings and Queens, where all the old pharaohs were buried, including King Tut and so forth. But also there at Luxor were temples built by Ramses II, the Great, Ramses the Great, in the 1500 BC time frame. So you can see this was quite old. And the ruins here, you can see the very large columns compared to the size of the people. They're very large. There were 67 of these columns in this one temple there at Karnak, next to Luxor. A little close-up view of Ramses. And you can see hieroglyphics carved on his shoulder, but you can also, if you look close, see hieroglyphics carved in the columns. They carved them on the walls. Every little inch of space in all of these temples were inscribed with hieroglyphics describing the great accomplishments of the great pharaoh. We went on south to see Abu Simbel, which many of you have seen pictures of. Maybe some of you have seen it. But this magnificent thing here, this temple, again by Ramses, was built on the banks of the Nile River in 1500 BC. And in 1960, when the Aswan Dam was being constructed, they knew right away that this was going to be inundated by Lake Nasser. And the dam was completed, and so a worldwide effort was made to raise money to move this. And you can see the difficulty one might have in moving it, but they did it by cutting it up into several hundred pieces that weighed several hundred tons apiece, and put them back together like a set of Legos, put a little super glue on it, and man, it looks just like it did back in, they say, in the original site. And I think that was a great accomplishment here for the world of history and heritage and so forth. Here's our group picture that we took, that was taken right in front of Abu Simbel. And we had a little fun on the way in the boat. We all dressed up in Egyptian costumes and had a little party. And a couple of guys in the front there that looked passed out. But Barb's over there on the left, and I'm in my red fez hat upper left. And we saw we had a great time. And we had a great time on all these. And we saw 8 out of the 9 eclipses that we've gone to. I thought maybe I'd whet your appetite just a wee bit before we close here. And that is future. What's coming up? In 08, 09, and 10, there will be an eclipse in each of those 3 years. Coming across Greenland on the North Pole area, across Siberia into China, northwest China, where the Mongolia border enters, that we have reservations to go there. I don't think Barb hasn't decided yet, but my grandson may go, but anyhow. In 09, he goes over to the city of Shanghai, onto the Pacific and the South Pacific. You get a boat trip there. They're already advertising on that. In 2010, you could take your sweetie to Tahiti or the Easter Island. It sounds intriguing to me to go to Easter Island and see those marvelous statues. In the United States, there's, I'm sorry, go back. Yes. Apologize. There's 3 in the first half of the 21st century that will touch the United States. One south of St. Louis, up at St. Joe, and then down the south of St. Louis, and one over Idabel, Oklahoma, in 2024. Now, the last one was in 79, the next one is in 17, and that's what, 38 years between eclipse in the United States. Southeast Oklahoma, now look at 045. Look where it goes. Tulsa, Oklahoma. The average city in the world sees a total eclipse every 375 years. So, don't miss that one, because it will be a long way out. That's 2045, and I'll be 119. I'm for sure not going to miss that. Now, just quickly here too is diagrams of the eclipses in the world in the first 25 years of this century. And the two across the United States, that X are those two in 17 and 24. The 045 Tulsa is not there because this is only first 25 years. But you can see the one on the top going across horizontally at the top of the world up there across Siberia and down into China is where we will be going in August. Gobi Desert in August of next year. Here's the little town of Hami that's sort of left central. It's where we'll stay and take a bus and go out where it's brown. And brown means sand and sun. Okay, that completes my presentation here today. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. We're kind of out of time, but we do the best we can here. In the meantime, you can figure out how you might spell eclipse. Any questions? Sign up sheet for Mongolia. Did I hear a question? It's always a diamond ring. It's always a diamond ring. Yeah. And it's before the totality and after. Well, I suppose that theoretically you can have a real smooth surface of the sun and you can get right to the diamond. There's always just a little bit of a thin of light. I would say in those places. So you see two diamond rings, one before and one after. Sorry, somebody have
Post. And so we've taken the old frosted glass out of the doors that came from that when they tore that building down, and we've etched an image of Hangar 1 on it. And on the back, I just want to read a little short thing here. Thank you for sharing in our vision and supporting our mission of creating the future, impacting the present, and learning from the past. That will inspire thousands of visitors each year at the Tulsa Air and Space Museum. Thank you.